Our guest today is Joe Diamond, the CEO of Axonius, which is the company that created the asset intelligence category on a very simple premise that you can't secure what you can't see. This year, Axonius crossed $200 million in annual recurring revenue, doubling in 2 years. And this month, they've recently introduced an AI agent and an MCP server so that the AI tools already running inside an organization can query verified asset data instead of guessing at it. He's here today to answer a question that every leader is asking: how many AI agents are actually running inside your computer right now? Joe Diamond, welcome to Lightwork. Joe, it is so great to have you on here. Axonius plays such a critical role in our ecosystem, and you all have created this space called, or category called, asset intelligence.
Yep.
We're really excited to have you on here to explain that for us and also demystify a little bit of what's happening around all things agents and security.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. So first and foremost, thanks for having me. It's great to be here and great to talk about asset intelligence as a whole. So it actually started as a category that was called CASM. So that's Cyber Asset Attack Surface Management. As you know, our space loves its acronyms. So no security conversation is complete without discussing many an acronym. But basically, it started under this guise of organizations needed to have better visibility and actually understand what was in their environments, what existed, and basically just give me an inventory. Because organizations at the time, this would have been around 2017, 2018, really had no idea. And actually still to this day, they really struggle with answering the question of what exists across my environment. So what are my laptops? What are my networks? What are my SaaS applications? What are my IoT and OT devices? And this presents obviously a huge security challenge when you don't know what's where. How do you actually go off and protect the risks that you have throughout the organization? So it started as CASM, but there was a very clear need for that to evolve in what we think of as asset intelligence, which is now, don't just give me the stuff. Don't just give me the inventory and the things. Also help me understand how they interface with each other. Like there's this laptop. What SaaS applications does it have access to? What is it doing when it accesses those SaaS applications and so forth? Obviously, this has become of even more paramount importance with AI agents and the rise of the play of AI in general, because what is AI at the end of the day? It's an AHI, effectively. It's a non-human identity. So you need to understand, what are those AI agents doing with those endpoints? What is it doing with those downstream cloud applications? What is it accessing? What does it have access to? What can it do? What did it do? And so forth. So asset intelligence is, very simply put, give me and help me understand all of the things that exist across my organization and what is it doing across my entire organization, and then help me respond when it's doing things or my assets are doing things that it shouldn't be doing, and help me understand all the risks that are happening across my company.
Yeah, I love this framing of real-time visibility into everything happening across your organization, just to make it tangible for folks who, might sit at a higher level, haven't really been in the room trying to track all of this. Before Axonius, what was that super fragmented process? What were people doing? And then you all came, I think in the last pre-AI, created this category of solution.
Yeah.
And then now today with agents, it feels like there is almost another evolution. So walk me through how that's evolved over the years.
Yeah. So in the past, people would use a different approach to try to address this. So it was either done with network sensors or with agents that are actually installed in the devices. I think it's pretty obvious why those approaches don't always work particularly well, because you're not going to have an agent on every device, right? And not every device supports agents, first and foremost. And then you're not going to control every network that people work off of. So when you go off and you rely on an agent-based approach or a network sensor-based approach in its entirety, you may only be getting 40 to 50% of what your entire ecosystem, what your footprint looks like. So I often refer to this as like, okay, so then you're accepting this notion of 40 to 50% of my environment might be the equivalent of dark matter. I don't know what's going on across that. And in a world in which AI is as pervasive as it is that okay? And now with Mythos exposing vulnerabilities across all of these different constructs across our organizations, we could be talking about organizations that were historically managing hundreds of thousands, if not low millions of vulnerabilities across its ecosystem to now millions upon tens of millions of vulnerabilities across its ecosystem, just as a result of discovering that extra 40 to 50% that exists across its footprint. So what we've done is we've gone with an API-based approach to do all the integrations with the downstream IT systems and security controls. So we have complete visibility into everything without relying on a network-based approach or an agent-based approach, simply put.
You mentioned Mythos, and I think for a lot of people, that was one of the more tangible data points around what is happening in cybersecurity. It was like the first aha moment of, okay, we've had so much cybersecurity infrastructure. It's amazing because it works seamlessly and it's invisible, and most people don't even touch that layer. But obviously, with the rise of Mythos and these systems that now have insane cybersecurity capabilities, comes also the risk of all these vulnerabilities not being patched. So in that case, what role does something like an Axonius play for companies that are looking to prepare themselves for an era where, a Mythos level model is out there in the public?
Yeah, it's just making it more critical to make sure that you understand what your environment is and that you understand all the risks and vulnerabilities that exist across that environment. So it starts with you have to know what's out there. And then what Axonius enables people to do is help me prioritize all the vulnerabilities that exist across all those different aspects of my environment. Now, again, if we're talking about a world where you have millions of different vulns that you have to go off and respond to, you have to really be good at prioritization, right? Because you can't triage and respond to all of those things particularly quickly, even if you're deploying AI yourself to go off and respond to them. So you need like your top 10 list, your top 20 list of like, these are the most critical. You may have what's perceived as a critical vulnerability, but if it's on an air gap network that doesn't have access to anything and it's not in communication with any devices, then its risk of actually being exploited is actually pretty low, right? So that might be a lower priority than something that is a non-critical vuln that is sitting on a printer that's on the open internet, as an example, right? So being able to pair together this notion of I understand my entire ecosystem with these are the vulnerabilities that I have with here's how I need to respond to them in what order, and here's what I do, it became amongst the most critical things, and it's been a massive tailwind for our business.
I love how, you laid out how it all flows into each other. You all have now recently, though, launched some new AI security capabilities, it sounds like. Tell us a little bit more about those.
So first, it started with us making sure that we launched an MCP, a model context protocol, which gives organizations the ability to take their frontier models that they already have, that they've deployed, and leverage the data that exists within Axonius to pair and ask questions of the Axonius data. Axonius has asset context data that you can't really get from anything else. So now they're able to take their, what they're asking of CrowdStrike paired with what they're asking of Axonius to draw a conclusion for how it is that they need to maybe respond to a forensic issue or a particular compromise that they're trying to chase down and then respond to. So that's one clear example. The MCP launch is coming out effectively now. The other aspect of this is what we call AI agent within Axonius. So what this is you can go into Axonius and then rather than relying on search or a query language, you can ask anything of the platform in plain English and it will tell you exactly what is going on across your environment. So as an example, you can say, show me all of my Windows endpoints that have a severity vulnerability level of 8 that is a high risk and on the open internet, as an example. And it will just give you, hey, here's the list of the things that you need to go off and respond to right now. And here's the recommended actions in order to go off and respond to it. So we're pairing sort of the ability to interface with a pretty complex set of data in plain English, but then also give the here's what you should do about it in plain English. So it's super actionable right away and they can go off and actually address it.
And historically, without something like an agent in Axonius, like how long would that workflow have taken, or how much friction was there?
To be blunt, you might just not be able to do it at all. You would probably going off and trying to pull that information from maybe 30 or 40 different systems. You would have to manually curate and stitch that together. And the way that organizations are oftentimes trying to solve this right now is through that raw approach and through the combination of spreadsheet dumps and VLOOKUPs and manual curation that way. And there's a lot of like hope for the best that comes with that sort of paradigm. But, in a world in which maybe that was acceptable 6 months ago, 9 months ago, 12 months ago, by the way, it wasn't acceptable then. It was just, we were a little bit more okay with accepting that risk at that point. Now, the impact can be quite dire. So we need to, as an industry, have our fundamentals in place. Our industry in general has this problem of, I call it shiny object syndrome, where we're always moving to the next shiny thing that we think that we should be solving, while forgetting that a lot of our fundamentals from a security program perspective weren't necessarily in place properly either.
It sounds like it's things like agents inside Axonius or this MCP that are massive step changes and unlock so much value because they're just simply core workflows, fundamental to the industry. I guess switching gears, one of the big things that stuck with me as I look at Axonius' company is this idea that you all have created this consolidated space where people can get full visibility into everything happening in their company from a cyber standpoint. And one thing that stuck with me is that this idea that nobody can tell you how many AI agents are running in your organization right now.
Yeah.
Before we get into how you all approach that, I think it would be helpful to explain a little bit more about why it is so important to even track this, and why is it different from tracking an agent versus tracking a human employee or tracking traditional software?
Yeah, it's I think of this as similar, but at a much grander scale than what we were talking about in the past with shadow cloud adoption, shadow IT, 10 years ago, 15 years ago or so. Everyone was off adopting cloud applications that weren't particularly sanctioned, and we had to figure out how to deal with it as an industry. And everyone was terribly scared of that at the time. You'll recall, right? We all remember those moments. Maybe I'm aging myself and maybe you don't remember those moments, but I certainly do. But from an AI perspective, it's that, but much worse because, back then it was harder to go off and deploy, a cloud application. But in this case, anyone can hop in a browser and actually do some pretty interesting or crazy things with just basic AI chat prompts that may be exposing very sensitive corporate data. So being able to actually understand what the AI agents are, how these tools are being used, where they're being used, and how they interconnect with every single aspect of your organization, whether you control the device or the network or not, is the most critical thing that organizations have to face today. The reason why that's so critical is, again, they have access literally to everything. And why this is different from the human, to answer your question, is how much more quickly they can move. A human is going to bounce around and maybe do something accidental through negligence or, so the blast radius is much smaller. Whereas with an agentic approach, it can literally touch everything within minutes, seconds across your entire organization, depending on what it has the permissions to do from just a read perspective or a write perspective or even a delete, standpoint. The damage it can do is, in some cases, can be irrecoverable.
Yeah, I was just thinking about Demis's recent piece of as you think about the progress that we've been able to achieve, he almost describes it as 10x the industrial revolution. But the scary part is at 10x the speed. And so
That's right.
I think dealing with that speed and dealing with that scale, maybe to help people understand just the gravity of this, what would at scale AI agent security breach even look like, or kind of give an example of a worst case scenario for a company, for example?
Yeah, I mean, the worst case scenario can be as brutal, and we've actually heard of scenarios like this where it goes in, you're asking it to do something that is, theoretically relatively straightforward, and it deletes your source code, and all of a sudden your application is gone, right? It has access to your HCM or your financial systems, and then it does something it shouldn't do, and all of your customer data is gone, or something to that degree. And remember, it touches every single aspect of your environment. And we are all still learning as an industry, including the frontier model developers themselves, how far this is going to go and the exact possibilities of where it's going to go over time. So there's a lot that we're learning together as an industry. And I think the worst case scenarios are oftentimes not fully understood. I know that there are great safeguards that we've put in place, but there are a lot of cases where they have moved around these particular safeguards that we've had in place. So there's a lot of unknown. There's some that is known, but the line that I've been using to describe this is you talk about 10x or 100x of the industrial revolution. I often talk of it in the context of this is as big, if not bigger, than the invention of the internet itself. So we are not fully understanding the possibilities of where this is going to go, in the same way that when, TCP/IP and, the internet first came about, we did not know where this was exactly going to go over time then either. This just has potentially and theoretically much greater potential.
I mean, truly just building the plane as we fly. In the same way that I think, to your point with the internet, are you seeing uptick in adoption in your customer environments around tracking these AI agents and kind of new forms of assets?
Folks are trying to figure out how they use existing tools to solve the problems that are in front of them. So it's like, hey, we bought these solutions from these platform players. What can we get information wise from the platform players that are already in place? The challenge is that typically ends at the network layer and the endpoint layer, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
what about everything in between? Right, becomes the big problem. And then like, what do you actually do about it? Like, what becomes the common fiber or the control plane that brings all of those things together? So when you think about the evolution of Axonius, it isn't purely for us to just be an asset intelligence platform that helps you manage your exposures. It's actually to be sort of the common control that brings your IT stack and your security stack together in one place to basically manage your entire security posture. And that's something that is obviously it's a very broad vision for where the company will be going over time, but it's a necessary one because there isn't a particularly good solution that exists in market to help us solve these problems as an industry.
Yeah, and it's helpful that you all are playing at that visibility layer, but then you're actually going a step further and thinking more broadly about action off of
Absolutely.
these identifications of issues. Speaking of that insane growth driven by the tailwinds that we're seeing around agents and making sure we're building a security layer around AI agents, you all have just crossed a big milestone of 200 million ARR, 100% growth in 2 years. Super impressive. You're at the helm of this as the CEO. What is next, and what have you largely seen as you've seen this kind of insane growth?
Yeah, the phenomenal thing is we saw a lot of this growth, really, I would say, before we caught what I would call the tailwind or now the jet stream of what's happening right now from an AI perspective. Because again, asset intelligence went from being like certain types of companies really need to have this to now everyone needs to have this as a part of the foundation of their cybersecurity program. So that is a phenomenal thing for us to catch, right? From this tailwind standpoint. So we're obviously, anxious and excited to tap into that, and we are as we speak. The other aspect of this is just every cybersecurity company always has to ask itself, is it in the right place in the cyber stack to solve a specific problem? We are in the right place in the stack as sort of like this neutral agnostic API layer that doesn't care about the network, that doesn't care about control over the device, to basically secure AI from end to end. So what's next for us is making sure that AI is deeply embedded in the platform itself, deploying agents on top of all the unique context and the data that we have within our platform, but also how it is that you look at AI as an asset class. So it's no differently than you look at, cloud applications, software that's installed in devices, IoT and OT as asset classes. AI is now an asset class as well. You have to be able to catalog all of your AI agents, what they're doing, where they are, how they interface with your entire organization. And that's our next movement. From a vision perspective, like we talked about, over time, you'll see us become sort of like that larger control plane, literally for everything. And driving action is sort of like the end state, if you will. We are the platform that makes it so you have visibility into everything, but also makes it so you can orchestrate and respond to all of the things to drive action that is an issue across your organization.
I want to definitely spend a little time on the vision towards then. But before that, I actually want to also hear a little bit more about your story, because I do think, we have a lot of founders, aspiring founders, operators who tune into our show. And I think it's awesome to hear about your trajectory. So I would love to hear more about, you were a CMO in 2024, president, 2025, CEO this year. Curious about your own trajectory of Axonius and how that impacts how you think about the company and, your journey alongside Axonius.
Yeah, I get this question quite a bit, in particular of the atypical journey from CMO to CEO. Maybe it's not the most common thing, but just from a historical standpoint, I never really believed in swim lanes. Like from a role perspective, I always sort of carried that, that ownership mindset of whatever the company's need is my need, and whatever problem needs to be solved is my problem. So I never saw swim lanes in terms of roles. First and foremost, I came up as a technologist, so I have an engineering background, and then moved into product, and then moved into marketing, and then basically I had run virtually every organization possible for the most part in a software company. And that was purposeful by design because I wanted to make sure that I understood every in and out of a company in as much as I possibly can. Everyone at the end of the day is an archetype, I think. Like I am by background, by design, I would say that I am a product guy. But understanding all of the dimensions and all of the makeup of a company, the technology side paired with the go-to-market side, paired with, everything from a G&A perspective tends to be pretty helpful in this role I found. And it's been a lot of fun.
In many ways, I feel like a lot of alignment in that I sit in this investment role, but I do a lot around media, and it feels like just narrative and storytelling and being able to drive these narratives is a big part of my day-to-day job. And so those blurred lines definitely resonate. I'm curious, you have just seen the evolution of the platform going through this big AI paradigm shift. You're a CEO of a company that is, constantly needs to build the plane as it's flying. How do you keep up with all the changes in the space and make sure you're building in the right direction?
There is no keeping up with all the changes in the space, I would argue, because it's moving so quickly. It feels like it's, a new model a day, a big shift a day at this point, if not multiple. I personally probably spend at least 2+ hours a day just on AI. I personally deploy and play with local LLMs, all the way through playing with the frontier models myself at like the deepest possible levels. So, I don't think you can do any of these jobs effectively without being an expert in them yourself. And so I make that a big part of my job. So that's aspect number one. And then aspect number two is, just staying very close to the customer, staying very close to what's happening in our market as a whole in terms of the needs and like what it is that organizations are doing and what they're primarily concerned about. And then of course, staying very close to the investor community because they have a really great pulse in terms of like what it is that they're seeing across the board as well. And, everyone is feeling kind of like the full spectrum of the paradigm of one end of the spectrum of gold rush versus the other end of the spectrum being bubble and figuring out like which one is this. I tend to think it's more on the end of gold rush and not just a point in time or a hype cycle. But there's a lot of ground to cover. I don't think it's possible to stay up on everything, but if we're not as aggressive in spending time and getting our hands dirty, you just won't know the details.
Of the infinite ground that could be covered in this moment, whether it's focusing more on product, keeping up with the agent build or the agent capabilities that you all are releasing, how are you thinking about like breaking down your time and where the individual teams or functions are pushing more?
Yeah, it's the Venn diagram of overlap might be more than what people think. Like we do have a lot of focus on how it is that we drive operational efficiency for all teams across the business from an AI perspective, because I do think there's a lot of lift to be gained. I think that one person can very easily become 10 if they know how to leverage AI properly. There's a lot of pressure in our industry, as you know, and a lot of organizations are figuring out like, do we have to make cuts in certain places? Like, how do we make those cuts? I don't personally look at it in that context. I look at it more in the context of how do we magnify the team that we have? How do we make them more streamlined? How do we make them more efficient? How do we make them, more capable? How do we make them faster? Like all of those things, like how do we maximize what it is that we have? The other side of that coin is how do we build robust AI capabilities into our platform? And do you have a unique qualifier for why that has to sit in your platform? Like we were talking about before, AI at the end of the day is a data game. If you have unique contextual data that you can't get anywhere else, you're ahead and you can be considered a winner. If you don't, you're kind of ripe for pretty profound disruption. So that's how I look at it. And I spend a lot of time thinking about both of those dimensions, a really significant part of the day.
It just like translates through the camera that you were like energized about and curious about the space and constantly learning. I feel like that's a common theme of so many great builders and founders in this space is this constant needs, and there's no one playbook, and so much of it is this ability to learn and adapt in real time. I think last two questions, you have this very unique window into the state of security and AI. What does securing an org even look like in 5 years, 10 years? Obviously, there's no predicting the space as we know, but in the best way possible, how can we make sense of what it's all going to look like?
It kind of goes back to a little bit of the fundamentals that we were talking about before. Are the fundamental principles for cyber programs going to be that different in 5 to 10 years as they were even 10 years ago from now, right? The reality is like, again, the fundamentals from 10 to 15 years ago, we still don't have in place today to the degree in which we need to have. Like, go sit down with any CISO and ask them, when they don't have Axonius in particular, what they know about their environment, what sits where, who has access to it, et cetera. More often than not, they're going to say, we don't. or we have a confidence score of like 5 or 4 or 3 out of 10, something to that degree. Now, it's not something necessarily that people want to speak super proudly about because it shows a hole in their overarching security posture, but it really is always about getting the basics right and the fundamentals right. The things that are going to evolve, the things that are going to shift over the next 5 to 10 years, to your point, are like what new attack surface areas are opened up. Like cloud years ago was a new attack surface area that we had to figure out how to go out and protect. AI is a new attack surface area that we have to go out and figure out how to protect. What new emerging areas are going to come? That is yet to be seen. And we're going to have to deal with the notion of quantum. Is quantum going to become a reality? And how much more efficient are these agents and is AI and compute going to be as a whole in terms of how quickly it can move? And what effect is that going to have on our overarching attack surface as well? So those are the things that I think of. I still think it's going to come down to fundamentals, but there are going to be new emerging threat factors that we're going to have to consider as a part of it.
Insane to think about, but I'm glad there are people like you thinking deeply for a lot of these companies. And last bit of advice for the founders and operators who are watching. I'm sure everyone's, certainly after this conversation, thinking a lot about how they can properly deploy AI agents. Do you have any advice about how to think about all of this?
Yeah, do the basics, get the fundamentals right, not just for how it is that you secure your environments, but also for how you run your business. I'm a big believer that you can do 3 things well at any given time. Make sure you're doing the right 3. Put the other 500 on the back burner and realize that you can only do so much at any given time. Maybe AI is going to help us get to being more effective at doing the 3, prioritizing the 3, or maybe we can even get to 4. But we're not particularly great at multitasking, so we have to embrace that as a reality, do the right things, and nail the fundamentals.
Thank you so much, Joe. This has been such a fascinating conversation. It's really made me think a lot deeper and take this 30,000-foot view about the future of AI and security because, to what I pointed out earlier, it is something that feels so invisible and everything runs so smoothly because of companies like Axonius. And it's just interesting to peel back all the chaos and potential chaos that AI might unlock and the ways that you all are making sure that everything we're working on is keeping safe.
That's great. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.